So we will go ahead and begin today with the presentation from Pablo Ralon, who was generously kind enough to take time out of his holiday to come and be here to present with us. So thank you for that, Pablo. We very much appreciate it. And Pablo is the Renewable Cost Status and Outlook Officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And he will be sharing his report that he just completed on renewable power generation costs in 2020. So Pablo, whenever you are ready, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Andrea, for your very kind words. And thank you again for the invitation. Let me just share my screen now. Let me see that. Here we go. I should do it. As Andrea mentioned, I work at IRENA. We do a lot of research in my team on renewable power generation costs. We've been doing it for a while now. And the latest we've been doing, so every year we do a major report called Renewable Power Generation Costs, and we update it. And we just launched our report a few weeks ago, actually. And so it's pretty much based, so the big chunk of the analysis that we do is based on out of two databases that we maintain at IRENA. They are, one of them we call the project cost database. Sometimes we call it the LCOE database. So what we do there is we try to keep track of real life costs or for renewable power generation projects. So we do all renewable energy technologies. As you see here, it's more, now we have surpassed the 20,000 projects. So 1,982 gigawatts of capacity are represented in that database. Is very large. So what we do with that, we have enough information for the real life project to calculate a robust LCOE estimate. And with that, we try to come up with what it means in terms of the competitiveness of renewables. In recent years, we started compiling data on PPA and auctions. So we set up a new database, sometimes called, so we call that the IRENA Renewable PPA and auction database. And that one is a bit smaller in terms of capacity, but also right now surpassing the 13,000 projects now. I'll explain a little bit later what we do with those. This is the report that I was mentioning about. This year, since now we have data that started for all technologies starting from 2010, we try to understand what has happened in the last decade. Generally speaking, and renewables have become extremely competitive during this decade. In 2020, for example, 62% of the utility scale capacity that was added that year cost less than the cheapest new coal option. Increasingly, renewables are undercutting even operating costs of coal. And the big news is actually, we now know that renewables are competitive, but the interesting part of it is not just about the power generation, the electricity sector, so to speak, but now, given that there's possibility to generate electricity very cheap with renewables, this will also have other implications in the broader energy decarbonization efforts, mostly through hydrogen. Like I said, taking a quick look at all technologies, what has happened, some continuous declines for all of the renewable energy technologies, especially the more modern ones. You see 7% for PV year on year. CSP 16%. Okay, the 2020 was not especially strong for CSP in terms of deployment, so it gets a little bit, it's a thinner database. 9% for offshore, 13% for onshore. Take a look at the 2010 to 2020 change. You see the LCOE dropped 85% for solar PV, which is the highest among all of the renewable energy technologies. So very remarkable decline for the cost of LCOE. Here, it's a little bit of a chart-wise thing here. So you can see the more on the left-hand side, you see biomass, geothermal, and hydro. So already very competitive, all of them. Even in, but the interesting story, of course, how solar technologies have declined steadily. 85% drop in the LCOE of solar PV, as I mentioned, down to 0.057 US dollars per kilowatt hour in 2020. So it's already at the very low end of the, what you see here, the gray range, so to speak, is the fossil fuel cost range. That is the global one. And all renewable energy technologies now fall within that fossil fuel cost range, and most of them are on the lower end of it or even undercutting it. So I mentioned before about the auction database and the LCOE database. What we see here is the LCOE database in blue and the auction database in orange. What we do here is we combine them both, so to speak. So for the historical part, we show mostly the LCOE database. And since we now have some database, auction database points and projects that go beyond 2020, 2021, 2022, in the case of offshore, even up to 2023, we normalize them and we clean them. It's a lot of effort and even to collect them, but then it gives very interesting insights into what is actually happening in the market, and what might be possible in terms of the LCOE in the years to come under the best possible conditions. So in the case of solar PV, we can see that the utility scale solar PV, so this is mostly based on the utility scale, by the way, what I'm showing here, is could by 2022, projects that are going to be commissioned in 2022 would be around 0.04 US dollars per kilowatt hour. So 4 cents per kilowatt hour on average. So, and an increasing number of projects that go even below that, below the 0.03 threshold. So the learning rate of PV is the highest among all renewable energy technologies from what we could research. If you take the LCOE as a metric, it is at 39% cost reduction for every doubling of the cumulative capacity of installed solar PV in the world. Here's a little snapshot of 3 important metrics. One is the total installed cost, so to speak, CapEx, all CapEx that are needed for a project. That it has seen a decline that has reached 883 US dollars per kilowatt. So that's the global average, the global capacity weighted average for all projects in the database that we have. And then the capacity factor has seen some increases. So the capacity factor is a little bit of a mixed story. You see it increase as the market shifts towards higher radiation conditions. But at the same time, the inverter load ratio has started to increase, and we're showing here the AC to DC capacity factor. So that's a little bit. Now, the 2020 data could still be a little bit revised because we still don't have enough data on what has happening with bifacial projects, which may push it up a little bit, but that is sometimes a little bit lagged compared to the CapEx data. So we're working hard to obtain those data to have a clearer picture of 2020, but provisionally this is what it looks like. And either way, it has increased from 13.8 in 2020 to 16.1 in 2010, sorry, to 2020. And this is, as I mentioned, a result of inverter load ratio changes. And also the other aspect of this is the increased use of trackers. That is also, we're making an effort to track, well, actually to keep a track of that, of what's happening there. On the other aspects of it, the balance of system costs have fallen as the experience has increased among developers worldwide. So that has implications at the same time. We show here the total installed cost declines around major markets and some newer ones. So they have in the market shown there between 77 and 90%, depending on the country. The differentials are narrowing, as you see here, but they still persist. So India is very low at 596, but Russia is around 3 times higher than that. So there has been convergence among markets, but differences still persist. So in spite of the decline of BOS costs, there are still differences among markets, as you may know. And the reasons for this will vary, and we'll discuss them a little bit later. We've tried to expand our cost breakdown analysis. So this is what is shown here is cost breakdown. We tried to harmonize the cost breakdown categories, which is a very challenging task, especially because the differences among markets. But we try to expand it also for more countries beyond the ones that we typically had followed that are here. So we have no more European markets and Chile, which is hidden there down there. And here, the second set is a little bit more homogeneous, not such stark differences, of course, because they are mostly all in the same region, but still, if you look at the LCOE reduction, they're also very steep among all markets. This is for the utility scale segment, but of course the distributed segment, in the case of residential PV systems, they have also seen declines, steep declines for the LCOE. So if you would assume a 5% WACC, you would see a range of 0.3 to 0.46 in 2010 for residential and 0.055 to 0.23 in 2020. So it's a decline of around 50 to 80% for the residential segment. So it's very similar trend for residential segment. In terms of what's driving this is for utility. So mostly the total install costs have driven in the last decade the LCOE cost declines, and so around 90% of the cost declines can be attributed to a category that is in the total install costs. So modules and inverters are accounted just by themselves for 55% of that decline, but BOS costs have started to make a major impact and are starting to increase in shares as well in the cost breakdown. And what we're here to discuss is actually OEM. Looks very tiny here, but that's just a factor of the really big impact that the capex reductions have had during the last decade. And I'm sure when you look at this chart in 2030, it will look very different. So we'll see a major contribution of OEM, and we're working on that on separate analysis on how the future might look like for the competitiveness of solar PV. But for now, you see already a big change in the OEM cost assumptions that we have in the database. So 33% cost decline for OEM and 62% depending on whether it's the OECD or non-OECD market. We're going to be talking more about how this will evolve later. Just a quick thing on whether it's possible to have very low LCOE of PV. You've seen, of course, many record-breaking high headlines that are done every once in a while, and one wonders whether this is possible. In the past, we've been a bit cautious about this. We've been saying, well, this is not possible everywhere, and this depends on very specific access to financing, and also now we're starting to think, actually, when you look at it and everything goes at its best, it's starting to become reality, right, in many markets. And you can see here an example for a project that we modeled for Saudi Arabia. We started for it to be to come online in 2021. We assume $550 per kilowatt, OEM cost of 8 per kilowatt per year, lifetime of 25 years, and a WACC of 3%. You end up at about around 0.016 US dollars. But if you account for a bit longer lifetimes, improved OEM cost down to 6 per kilowatt per year, and really, let's say, optimal WACC of 1.9%, you could reach an LCOE of 0.0104 US dollars per kilowatt hour, assuming those conditions. But they are, of course, still best case conditions, but interesting to see, and interesting to see how these OEM cost reductions will occur and where they're coming from. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Happy to answer more questions later if needed.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Pablo. Yes, we can definitely come around during the Q&A session for more questions.